The city was burning. Smoke rolled through the streets like thunderclouds torn loose from the sky. Men shouted, women screamed. And the last government of the Confederacy, the dream of a nation that never truly existed, was collapsing in real time. Inside the Confederate treasury, under the flicker of gaslight, a young officer named Captain Micah Harlan stood frozen, staring at what lay before him, mountains of gold coins, silver bars, and crates of jewelry seized from banks. Citizens in southern states desperate to fund the war.
"I'll load it,"
said a voice behind him, cold, low, and urgent. It was Judah Benjamin, the Confederate Secretary of State, his face pale from exhaustion and fury. "Everything. The Yankees are at our gates." Harlan hesitated. "Sir, we can't move all of it in time." "Then move what you can," Benjamin snapped. "The rest will burn with Richmond." Outside, artillery thundered. Federal forces were breaking through the lines. The Confederacy for years of war, blood, and illusion was ending tonight. But in the chaos of that ending, something extraordinary began. At midnight, as fire consumed the city, a small train stood waiting on the tracks behind the old Confederate Mint. It had no markings, no military insignia, only the glint of gold in the lantern light as soldiers hurriedly loaded heavy chests into the cargo cars. Captain Harlan supervised the operation, his heart pounding. The air smelled of smoke and gunpowder. A telegraph operator approached him, clutching a piece of paper. "Sir, new orders from President Davis himself." Harlan read the message. "The Treasury train is to proceed south without delay. Priority 1. Destination, Danville." "Danville," Harlan muttered. "That's too close." But he obeyed. Within minutes, the train's whistle screamed a lonely, haunting sound, and the locomotive lurched forward into the burning night. By dawn, Richmond was ash and rubble. President Jefferson Davis, fleeing by horseback, carried the last hope of the Confederacy with him, that somewhere in the chaos, the South's treasure would be saved. No one knew exactly how much gold was on that train. Some accounts said $500,000 in coin, roughly $10 million today. Others claimed far more. Millions in gold bullion, family jewels, and foreign bonds hidden in secret compartments. What is certain is this. The train left Richmond that night, and within weeks, it vanished. The Confederate gold train was last confirmed in Washington, Georgia, on May 24, 1865. After that, its trail went cold. Union officers reported that Confederate soldiers had scattered its contents across the countryside. Some buried it, some stole it, and some were murdered for it. Rumors spread that a portion of the gold was hidden in Lake Michigan, another buried near Lincoln County, Georgia, and some secretly taken to Mexico by escaping Confederate officials. The mystery grew with every retelling, and by the early 1900s, it had become a legend that still stirred greed in men's hearts. Half a century later, in 1913, a prospector named Elias Carter walked into a tavern in Alabama with a story that would reignite the legend. He claimed he'd found Confederate coins buried in a rotted wooden chest deep in the woods, coins stamped with 1864 dates, untouched for decades. Into the lid, he said, was a rusted Confederate insignia and a note that read simply, "For the cause, bury what must not fall." Within days, treasure hunters descended on the area. Most found nothing but dirt, but a few found things that should have been impossible. Old weapons, melted gold, military buttons, and a story that refused to stay buried. By the 1920s, the lost Confederate gold had become an American obsession, the subject of dime novels, newspapers, and silent films. But beneath the myth was a truth no one could quite piece together. What really happened that night in 1865? Some said the gold was hidden by secret Confederate agents planning to fund a second rebellion. Others believed Union soldiers stole it and covered up the theft. And a few of the most dangerous ones believed the treasure was cursed, because everyone who went looking for it either went broke, went mad, or went missing. "The South may have lost the war," wrote one old prospector in 1927, "but it still keeps its secrets better than any living man." The story of the Confederate gold was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The air smelled of rain and red clay. Thunder rolled across the hills like drums from another century, echoing over the same ridges that once shook with cannon fire. Down a muddy road outside Washington, Georgia, A man in a dark wool coat guided a mule-drawn cart toward the ruins of an old plantation. His name was Thomas Tom Delaney, and he was not supposed to be there. He was a school teacher by trade, a historian by passion, and an outlaw by choice. It began 3 weeks earlier when Tom received a letter sealed in wax. The envelope was brittle, the handwriting elegant, the kind that belonged to another era. Inside was a folded parchment, yellowed with age. On it, drawn in fading ink, was a map. In the corner, barely legible, were the initials MH. Tom turned the paper in his hands a dozen times before realizing what he was holding. "Micah Harlan," he whispered. "The Confederate officer who vanished with the Treasury train in 1865. The map showed the route from Richmond to Washington, Georgia, marked with hand-drawn notes. Crossed Savannah River at night. Buried load near Briar Creek. Trust only Benjamin's men." At the bottom, scrawled in darker ink, was a single line. "What is lost is not gone. It sleeps." Tom's hands trembled as he traced the map with a candlelight that night. He'd spent years studying the Confederate treasury, written articles about the lost gold, debated its fate in dusty lecture halls. But this was something no historian had ever seen. It wasn't a myth anymore, it was evidence. Still, he hesitated. The map could be fake, a forgery, a trap. But curiosity was stronger than caution. By the next morning, Tom had packed his bags, resigned from his teaching post, and left a note for his sister in Atlanta. "I've gone looking for history. Don't worry if you don't hear from me soon." Washington, Georgia, is where the Confederate government held its last cabinet meeting in May 1865. Before Jefferson Davis fled west, and the dream of the South dissolved into legend. By 1908, the town was quiet, its streets lined with crumbling mansions, Spanish moss, and old men who still spoke of the war as if it had ended yesterday. Tom rented a room above a general store and spent his days at the county courthouse, poring through land deeds, war records, and burial maps. He found nothing until an old clerk handed him a faded ledger marked "Confidential, May 1865. Inside, among lists of requisitioned horses and confiscated wagons, was a single curious entry. April 28, 1865, 3 crates, contents undisclosed, transferred from CSA Treasury train to private wagon under order of Capt. Mel. Destination, Briar Creek, Jefferson County. Tom's pulse quickened. Briar Creek, the same name from the map. By the following week, Tom was on the road, traveling south by cart through endless pine woods and winding rivers. The deeper he went, the older the land felt, as if history itself clung to the soil. Locals warned him that Briar Creek was haunted. They told stories of phantom soldiers seen wandering the woods, of buried iron chests that cursed those who touched them. Tom laughed it off at first, but on the third night, camped near an abandoned homestead, he woke to the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling his tent. He called out, "Who's there?" No answer. Only the low rustle of wind through pine needles. When morning came, he found boot prints in the mud, old but clear, leading toward the creek. At dusk, Tom reached what was left of an old cabin. Its roof had collapsed, its chimney half swallowed by vines, but carved into the hearthstone were 3 letters, MH, the same initials from the map. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. Inside the cabin, beneath the floorboards, found something wedged between the beams, a rusted metal box the size of a shoebox. Inside was a water-damaged diary. The first page was still legible, April 30th, 1865. "We cannot keep it all. Benjamin's men grow restless. Some have taken shares and fled. The gold must be hidden before they return. God forgive us if it is found by the wrong hands." Signed, Micah Harlan. Tom stared at the page until his hands shook. This wasn't rumor. This was first-hand evidence written by the man who guarded the Confederate gold. That night, under a full moon, Tom sat by the creek reading the rest of Harlan's diary. It told of betrayal, of soldiers turning on each other, killing over crates of coin, and burying their shares across the countryside. One passage caught his eye. "I left my portion beneath the weeping sycamore by the bend where the creek splits in two. I marked it with the blade of my saber. But I fear even death will not keep men from searching." Tom closed the diary and looked up. The creek ahead twisted and split, just as Harlan described. And on the far bank, outlined by moonlight, stood a single sycamore tree, ancient and pale, its roots reaching like fingers into the earth. He smiled, grabbed his shovel, and stepped into the water. But what Tom Delaney didn't know was that someone else was watching him. When Tom returned to town the next day to buy supplies, he noticed a man in a black hat sitting by the train station. He was reading a newspaper upside down. Tom felt a prickle of unease. When he passed again that evening, the man was gone, but his room door upstairs had been forced open. The map and diary were still there, but his clothes had been searched, and a single bullet was left on the table. Tom realized then that the legend of the Confederate gold wasn't just a historian's curiosity. Someone else was hunting it too, and they were willing to kill for it. "History doesn't stay buried," he wrote in his own notebook that night. "It waits. It listens. And sometimes, it wants to be found." Tom packed his bags again, this time with a revolver beside the diary. The next morning, he returned to the creek. It was close, closer than anyone had ever been. But the closer he came to truth, the more dangerous it would become. The forest was alive with rain. It fell in silver threads through the canopy, soaking the red clay until it clung to Tom Delaney's boots like blood. He moved carefully through the undergrowth, following the creek as it twisted through the trees. The air was thick with the scent of moss and decay, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill cried, long and lonely. Tom stopped when he saw it. The sycamore tree. Its bark glowed ghost white in the fading light, its trunk gnarled with age. Even after all these decades, it stood exactly as Micah Harlan had described in his diary, at the bend where the creek forked in two, its roots dipping into the black water. For a moment, Tom just stood there, his heart pounding. This was it. This was the place where history whispered. He marked a circle beneath the sycamore's lowest limb and began to dig. The first few inches were soft, wet earth and tangled roots. Then the ground hardened, packed with clay and old stone. He worked for hours, the sound of the shovel striking earth echoing in the quiet. Every scrape sent a thrill through him. Every breath of damp air carried the ghosts of the past. When his shovel finally hit something solid, he froze. He brushed the soil aside and revealed the corner of a wooden crate, blackened by age, bound with iron bands. The wood was soft to the touch, half-rotted, but unmistakably man-made. Tom's throat went dry. He cleared more dirt until the crate was fully exposed, then pried open one corner with his knife. A flash of gold. Coins thick, heavy, marked with the Confederate seal. He gasped, half laughing, half crying. It was real. It was all real. The rain began to fall harder. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the creek like molten silver. Tom knelt beside the chest, his hands trembling as he lifted a coin. It was stamped 1864, minted in New Orleans, one of the last before the Union captured the city. There were hundreds, maybe thousands in the crate. He reached deeper and felt something different. A small iron box beneath the gold. He pulled it free. The lock was rusted, but it broke easily. Inside lay a bundle of folded papers sealed with wax. On top, a brass insignia shaped like an eagle clutching arrows, the seal of the Confederate States government. Tom opened the first page, careful not to tear it. The handwriting was elegant, steady. To the government of the United States, to be opened upon honorable peace. Judah P. Benjamin, Secretary of State, CSA. Tom's pulse hammered. This wasn't treasure, it was evidence. He turned another page. It was a letter addressed to General Robert E. Lee, dated March 1865, and another addressed to Napoleon III of France, appealing for foreign aid in the final days of the war. But the final document chilled him to his core. A signed receipt acknowledging the transfer of funds Confederate Treasury gold to a network of private Southern banks for safekeeping in the event of defeat. Neat signed M. Harlan. Witnessed J.P. Benjamin. Tom realized what it meant. The missing Confederate gold wasn't just lost, it had been deliberately hidden, funneled into secret accounts to rebuild the South's economy in secret after the war. If he could prove it, history itself would be rewritten. Twigs snapped behind him. Tom turned sharply. Standing in the shadows at the edge of the clearing was a man in a black hat, the same stranger from the train station. Rain glistened on the barrel of the revolver in his hand. "Evening, Mr. Delaney," the man said, his voice smooth, southern, practiced. "You've made quite the discovery." Tom's grip tightened around the shovel. "Who are you?" "Let's say I represent an interested party." The man stepped closer, his boots sinking into the mud. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you." Tom gestured to the gold. "This belongs to history, belongs to everyone." The man smiled faintly. "History doesn't pay bills." He raised the gun, step away from the chest. Lightning flashed again, and Tom dove. The gun fired, shattering the quiet. The bullet tore through Tom's coat as he tackled the stranger, the two men rolling in the mud. They fought in the rain, slipping, grunting, the revolver skidding away. Tom swung the shovel. It connected with a sickening crack. The stranger collapsed, motionless. Tom staggered back, gasping, blood and rain mixing on his face. He didn't wait to see if the man was alive. He stuffed a handful of papers from the iron box into his satchel, covered the chest with mud again, and fled into the woods. By dawn, he reached the main road, soaked, exhausted, shaking. Behind him, smoke rose through the trees. Someone had set fire to the cabin. Tom looked back only once. Then he turned toward Atlanta. He knew he couldn't go to the authorities. Not yet. If the documents were real, they could prove that powerful Southern families had built their post-war fortunes on hidden Confederate gold. And those same families still held influence in banks and politics, even in Washington. He needed proof. He needed allies. He needed to disappear. Weeks later, in a small boarding house outside Savannah, Tom wrote his first report, careful, coded, and incomplete. He mailed copies to two trusted colleagues, one in Washington, one in New York. Then he vanished. Some said he went north and lived under another name. Others said he returned to the creek and buried what he'd taken, unable to let it go. But one thing was certain. After 1908, Thomas Delaney was never seen again. In 1929, during renovations at the Georgia State Archives, a janitor discovered a sealed envelope hidden inside an old desk. Inside was a partial map, badly damaged, and a single page from a diary signed M. Harlan. Scrawled at the bottom in shaky handwriting was a final note. To whoever finds this, the truth is buried deeper than gold. The legend of the Confederate treasure surged back to life. Reporters, treasure hunters, historians, all descended on Georgia once more, chasing shadows, rumors, and pieces of a story that refused to die. Met somewhere in those woods, beneath a sycamore older than any living man. The gold still slept, waiting for the next soul brave, or foolish, enough to find it. The city never truly slept, not even in the darkest years of the Depression. Electric lights still burned in the banks of lower Manhattan, even as bread lines stretched 4 blocks and half the nation starved. Inside the Continental Trust Bank, a thin man in wire-rimmed glasses sat alone in an office filled with dust and silence. His name was Edward Langston, an investigator for the newly formed Office of Economic Security, a precursor to the modern FBI's financial division. Langston had been assigned to audit the old ledgers of failed Southern banks that had recently collapsed under the weight of the Depression. It was routine work, numbers, signatures, and faded ink. But that evening, as he traced one peculiar entry, he realized he'd stumbled onto something far from routine. The page was dated June 1865, the end of the Civil War. But it wasn't from a Southern bank. It was from Langley and Bird Investments, a Manhattan firm that had quietly managed European transfers for decades. The Confederate government had collapsed 2 months earlier. How could gold from the defeated South end up in a New York investment firm? He flipped the page and found another note, written in different handwriting. Funds transferred to secondary accounts under alias. Benjamin Trading Co., client to remain unnamed. Langston sat back in his chair. Benjamin Trading Co. His mind went immediately to Judah P. Benjamin, the Confederate Secretary of State, the same name whispered in Southern legends of the missing gold. He read the line again. The handwriting, the date, the initials MH, all of it matched the documents rumored to have been found years earlier by the missing historian Thomas Delaney. Langston didn't believe in legends, but he did believe in money, and money always left a trail. He spent the next week buried in records, tracing every line that connected Benjamin Trading Co. to modern accounts. The deeper he dug, the stranger it became. The company had officially dissolved in 1871, yet its funds were quietly absorbed by a new entity in 1873. Atlantic Mercantile Holdings registered in Charleston, South Carolina, and from there, its capital flowed like a hidden vein through multiple banks and shell corporations all the way into the 20th century. The amounts were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars, always drawn in gold-backed certificates, always under old Southern surnames: Harlan, Beaumont, Caldwell, Sutton, the descendants of Confederate officers. Langston's pulse quickened. Could it be that the Confederate treasury had survived the war, hidden behind a wall of private trusts? If so, the implications were explosive. The Reconstruction economy, Southern railroads, even major textile companies, all could have been funded by gold that technically belonged to the U.S. government. And worse, some of those names appeared on campaign donation lists. Politicians, senators, even a judge. On the third night of his research, Langston noticed something odd. The lock on his office door was broken. His desk drawers had been searched. Nothing was missing except for the single ledger page with the MH entry. He called his supervisor immediately, but the man only sighed. "Mr. Langston," he said, "I advise you to leave that matter alone. The books you're reviewing predate federal jurisdiction. They're ghosts." Langston hung up slowly, realizing what that meant. He was being told to bury it. But ghosts or not, someone was still protecting those accounts 70 years later. He gathered his notes, packed them into a brown envelope, and decided to visit the only man in Washington who might listen. 2 days later, Edward Langston stood inside the marble halls of the newly founded Federal Bureau of Investigation. J. Edgar Hoover's office was as cold and precise as the man himself. Langston laid out his evidence, photocopies of the ledger, account histories, and his theory that a portion of the Confederate treasury had been laundered through New York banks after the war, hidden under false corporations and used to finance generations of Southern industry and political influence. Hoover listened silently, his eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. When Langston finished, there was a long pause. "Sir?" "Langston," Hoover said finally, "what you're describing is either the greatest historical hoax in American finance or the most dangerous truth in our archives." He tapped his pen on the desk. "And if it's true, then you've just put a target on your back." Langston shifted uneasily. "I thought you'd want to investigate." "Oh, we will," Hoover said, leaning forward. "But not officially. Not yet. Till we're certain. This remains classified. We'll continue your audit as if nothing happened. And if someone's already watching me..." Hoover smiled thinly. "And make sure you give them something worth watching." A week later, Langston received a brown envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed a group of men standing in front of a Charleston bank. Taken around 1880, one of the men was unmistakably older, but the caption on the back read, "M.H. Charleston, 1881. Langston's hands trembled. Micah Harlan was supposed to have died in 1865. If this photo was genuine, it meant he had survived and possibly lived long enough to oversee the hidden gold himself. The letter that came with it was typed, "Follow the trail to Augusta. Seek the vault that was never listed. No lived longer than they told you. No name, no signature." Langston stared out the window, the city lights glittering below him. For the first time in his career, he felt the cold thrill of history breathing down his neck. He knew then that this wasn't just about missing treasure. It was about the rewriting of the American story, the part written in gold, not ink. On October 9, 1932, Edward Langston boarded a southbound train to Georgia with his files and the photograph in his briefcase. He never arrived. The train made all its scheduled stops except the last one. Langston's compartment was found empty. His luggage was gone. Only one thing was left behind: a folded map with the initials MH in the corner. The Bureau classified the case as missing in transit. Unofficially, Hoover ordered all files related to Confederate assets sealed and buried. The mystery, once again, went silent. Years later, a janitor cleaning out the Continental Trust basement found a torn piece of paper jammed between the floorboards. It was the missing ledger page, the one Langston had discovered. On the back, someone had written in pencil, "The South never lost its gold. It only changed its banks." Every century inherits its ghosts. A historian would later write, And in America, those ghosts were the color of money. The river ran slow and brown beneath the cotton bridges, carrying with it a century of silt and secrets. From the red brick skyline of the textile mills came the steady pulse of machinery, a rhythm that had not changed since the war that was supposed to end all wars. At the edge of the Harlan cotton mill, a young reporter named Clara Winslow stood beneath a rusted sign and adjusted the strap of her notebook bag. She was 27, sharp-tongued, and famously stubborn, the kind of woman who smoked in public and refused to apologize for asking the wrong questions. Her editor at the Augusta Chronicle had sent her to write a simple nostalgia piece about the old Confederate families who had turned cotton into fortune. But Clara had a different motive. In her desk drawer at home lay a packet of letters she'd inherited from her great-uncle, Edward Langston. The letters mentioned a vault that was never listed, and the last place he was traced to was Augusta. Inside the mill, the air was thick with lint and steam. Men in overalls worked the spindles, shouting over the roar of the machines. Clara was led upstairs to a glass-walled office where Henry Beaumont, the current owner, waited with a polite smile. Beaumont was in his 60s, silver hair, linen suit, the look of old Southern money made respectable through charm. His family name had appeared in Langston's ledgers. Clara knew it before she shook his hand. "So you're writing about Southern industry?" he said, offering her a glass of iced tea. "There's plenty of that story to tell, Miss Winslow. We've been at it since before Reconstruction." "I imagine you have," Clara said, scanning the walls. Behind his desk hung a faded map. Augusta, 1865, with several red circles marked along the riverbanks. "Mind if I ask what those markings are?" Beaumont smiled faintly. "Old survey points, flood control studies from my grandfather's time, nothing worth printing." But Clara noticed something else. One of the circles was drawn exactly where the Harlan mill now stood. And beneath the glass of his desk, half hidden under papers, was a photograph, a black and white image of a group of men in front of a Charleston bank. She recognized it instantly. The same photo that had been found among Langston's effects. The same man with the initials MH. Micah Harlan. That night, Clara returned to the mill grounds after hours. The gate was chained, but she found a gap in the fence by the loading docks. Inside, the hum of the machines was replaced by a deeper sound, the faint echo of rushing water from beneath the floor. Following the noise, she descended a narrow staircase into the sub-basement, where stone walls met iron pipes and the air turned cool and damp. At the end of the corridor, she found a door. It was old Civil War era, sealed with rivets and painted over. It took her 2 days and a borrowed crowbar from the maintenance shed to pry the lock loose. When the door finally gave, it opened into a tunnel, stone-lined, dripping, cold. She followed it with a flashlight until it widened into a chamber the size of a church crypt. Crates, dozens of them, stacked and sealed in wax. Each one marked with a 3-letter stamp, CSA, Confederate States of America. Clara knelt, brushed the dust from one of the lids, and saw something that made her breath catch. A wax seal imprinted with a serpent coiled around a sword. The Harlan crest. She pried the lid open. Inside lay rows of gold bars, dull with age, but unmistakable in their weight and color. At the bottom was a bundle of documents, ledgers, receipts, and a letter dated 1865. To the custodians of the Southern Trust, the treasury of our cause must never fall to the victors. The war is over in name only. Guard it until the South may rise honest again. Mashi dropped the letter, hands trembling. This wasn't legend. This was the Confederate treasury, or what remained of it. But before she could take another photograph, she heard footsteps. "Curiosity," said a voice behind her, "can be an expensive habit." Clara turned. Henry Beaumont stood in the doorway, a revolver resting loosely in his hand, his silver hair catching the flashlight beam. "I hoped you'd find it," he said quietly. "My grandfather built this mill around that vault, said it kept the family safe and the South proud." Clara steadied her voice. "Safe from what?" "From forgetting." He stepped closer. "You think this gold was lost? It's been working for us ever since, in banks, factories, elections. You live in the America that gold built, Miss Winslow. It didn't vanish. It matured." He raised the gun slightly. "Shouldn't have come here." Clara's mind raced. "If you kill me, everyone will know what you're hiding." Beaumont smiled. No one will believe it. The South's greatest secret has always been that no one wants to know. He took another step, and suddenly, a beam of light burst through the tunnel behind him. Voices echoed. Police. She'd left her notes with her editor with instructions to call the authorities if she didn't return. Beaumont hesitated. Then, with one last look at the vault, he turned the gun on himself and fired. The report thundered through the chamber, followed by the collapse of an overhead beam. Water began to pour in, the old tunnel giving way. Clara ran, clutching one of the gold bars and the letter in her hands. By the time the police reached her, the vault had flooded entirely, buried again beneath tons of stone and mud. The revelation in the days that followed, the newspapers called it the Augusta Flood. No mention of gold. No mention of Harlan. The official report blamed a structural failure in the old mill. But Clara's editor knew the truth, and so did the men who came from Washington 2 days later, flashing badges she didn't recognize. They took her notes, the gold bar, and even the photograph of the vault. They thanked her politely, told her the matter was classified, and left. Before they did, one of them, an older agent with sharp eyes, paused and said quietly, "Miss Winslow, if you value your work, forget what you saw. The Bureau buried this story once before. Don't make us do it again." When they were gone, she went home and opened the last of Langston's letters. Inside was a line she'd never noticed before. "History is a ledger, Clara. What's written in ink is for the people. What's written in gold is for the powerful." She closed the letter and looked out at the river, where the mill's reflection shimmered beneath the autumn sky. The South, it seemed, had never lost its gold, only its conscience.